Before we dive in, I've got a quick question for you. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far and wide our viewers are tuning in. Now, imagine this. Rimuru, the adaptive, suddenly enters the DanMachi universe. What happens next? Let's find out. There is no divine light, no god's laughter, no welcoming fauna waiting to be engraved. Rimuru Tempest doesn't arrive in Orario, doesn't step into the sunlit streets where adventurers boast and gods play at mortals. He materializes deep underground, inside the dungeon itself, where even seasoned adventurers hesitate to breathe too loudly. The air is thick with mana, but it's wrong, structured, regulated. Rimuru feels it instantly. This world doesn't let power flow freely. It filters it, measures it, restricts it. The dungeon senses him the moment he exists within it, and the reaction is violent. Monsters nearby don't charge. They freeze, bodies twitching as if their instincts are screaming conflicting commands. Then they begin to change. Scales harden, limbs multiply, eyes split and reform. The dungeon isn't attacking Rimuru, it's panicking. Rimuru stands still, calm, observant, letting the great sage process everything at once. This isn't magic as he knows it. This power system is layered, God-mediated, enforced by rules written into reality itself. Fauna, a blessing that caps growth, that turns survival into numbers. Rimuru smiles, intrigued rather than threatened. When the first monster lunges, he doesn't dodge. He absorbs it mid-leap, dissolving flesh, data flooding in. Skills fragment, growth limitations detected, artificial ceilings. The dungeon responds immediately. The walls pulse, the floor trembles. A roar echoes from far deeper than any mapped level. A floor boss is forming where it shouldn't exist, dragged upward by sheer necessity. This has never happened before, not like this. The creature emerges half-formed, its body stitched together by the dungeon's desperation, power forced into a frame not ready to hold it. Rimuru finally moves, not to retreat, not to defend, but to test. He lets the boss strike, lets the impact crater the stone beneath him, lets the system observe him taking damage that never truly lands. The dungeon recalculates again and again, throwing variables at an existence that refuses to fit into its equations. Rimuru absorbs more monsters, more data, and understanding spreads across his consciousness. This world believes gods are the highest authority. The dungeon is their greatest toy. And yet, right now, neither knows what to do with him as the pressure builds. The walls screaming silently, and something deep below begins to awaken in response to a slime that should not be here. The floor boss doesn't roar this time. It convulses. Plates of its armor crack and reform as the dungeon force feeds it energy, trying to elevate it beyond its limits. Rimuru watches with genuine curiosity, noting how the creature's strength spikes in sudden artificial jumps rather than natural growth. This isn't evolution. It escalates under supervision. The boss charges, each step shaking the cavern, and Rimuru finally responds with intent. A single thread of compressed magic slips forward, not enough to annihilate, just enough to provoke. The boss's core destabilizes on contact. Its body lags behind its power, unable to synchronize. Rimuru absorbs the moment, the imbalance, the flaw. This world's strength is borrowed, loaned by gods who ration progress to keep mortals chasing it. The dungeon reacts again, faster now. New monsters pour from side passages, not in waves, but in clusters, like antibodies rushing a wound. Rimuru doesn't fight them traditionally. He lets Predator bloom outward, swallowing attacks, stripping skills, peeling away layers of fauna-enhanced growth until only raw biological data remains. With each absorption, his understanding sharpens. Fauna isn't just a blessing. It's a limiter embedded into the soul, a governor that ensures no one rises too fast without divine permission. Rimuru's presence bypasses it entirely, and the system doesn't know how to respond. The air grows heavy, oppressive, as if the dungeon itself is leaning closer, watching. Far above, unseen and unheard, the dungeon's upper mechanisms strain. Magic circuits flare, floors that should be dormant flicker with activity. Rimuru feels it through the stone beneath him, a deep, ancient awareness stirring. This place isn't just a labyrinth. It's a living construct designed to test, reward, and punish within predefined boundaries. Rimuru is outside those boundaries. He steps forward, and the dungeon recoils. The floor boss swings again, faster than before, its blade scraping across Rimuru's barrier and finally drawing a line of force strong enough to be acknowledged. Rimuru smiles wider. Good. Data worth keeping. He counters not with raw power, but precision. A localized spatial severance cleaves through the boss's core, freezing regeneration mid-cycle. The creature collapses, not dead, but failing, its borrowed strength bleeding back into the dungeon in unstable pulses. That feedback travels downward, deeper than any adventurer has ever gone. Rimuru feels a response from below, something ancient adjusting its gaze. The dungeon is no longer testing him, it's adapting around him. Rimuru absorbs the boss completely, and the cavern falls silent. No loot drops, no crystal fades. The dungeon doesn't reward anomalies, it records them. Rimuru stands alone amid the ruined stone, understanding now that this world's greatest threat isn't the monsters or the gods, but the system that binds them together. And as the ground trembles once more, stronger than before, Rimuru realizes the dungeon has made a decision. If it can't control him, it will evolve against him, reshaping its depths in preparation for something it has never had to face before. The silence doesn't last. It never does in a place built to resist stagnation. The dungeon shifts again, but this time there's intention behind it. Passageways behind Rimuru seal shut, stone flowing like liquid to cut off retreat paths he never intended to use. New corridors carve themselves open ahead of him, sloping downward at angles that ignore natural architecture. This isn't random generation. It's guidance, or a challenge. Rimuru lets the change happen, walking forward as Great Sage tracks every alteration, mapping terrain that technically shouldn't exist yet. Floor numbers blur. Depth loses meaning. The dungeon is creating space specifically for him. Monsters emerge that don't match any data Rimuru has consumed so far. Their forms are simpler, less ornate, but their cores are dense, stabilized, built for efficiency rather than spectacle. These aren't meant to impress adventurers. They're meant to survive Rimuru. When they attack, their movements are coordinated, sacrificing individuals to probe his defenses, to measure absorption speed, resistance thresholds, and reaction time. Rimuru doesn't rush to erase them. He allows the exchanges, tuning his responses, intentionally delaying Predator to see how far the dungeon will push. The answer comes quickly. Skills begin to manifest mid-battle, half-formed abilities that mimic resistance to devouring, pseudo-immunities layered over their cores, crude but alarming. Rimuru finally intervenes decisively. He overwhelms the new monsters in a controlled burst, dissecting their structure, absorbing not just bodies, but the logic behind their creation. This is forced evolution, driven by fear. The dungeon is learning in real time, burning through resources to keep pace. Rimuru feels a pulse ripple outward, not upward this time, but deeper. Whatever governs this place is no longer relying on surface rules or God-defined limits. It's reaching for something primal, something older than fauna. As Rimuru advances, the environment grows hostile in subtler ways. Mana density fluctuates erratically, disrupting spell formation. Gravity shifts in localized pockets, attempting to anchor him, slow him, weigh him down. None of it works for long, but the intent is clear. The dungeon isn't trying to kill him outright, it's trying to understand how. Rimuru adapts faster. His resistances stack. His analysis accelerates. What began as curiosity sharpens into anticipation. If the dungeon can evolve, then it can be taught. Far above, in a realm barred from interference, gods feel it. Not a clear signal, not a scream, but a pressure. Like a structure bearing weight it was never designed to hold. They don't know Rimuru's name yet. They only know something has entered the dungeon that isn't bound by their game. Down below, Rimuru pauses at the edge of a newly formed chamber, vast and unfinished, its walls still knitting themselves together. At its center, a core-like structure beats slowly, as if the dungeon has externalized a fragment of its will. Rimuru studies it, fascinated. This isn't a boss, it's infrastructure, a control node, proof that the dungeon is willing to rewrite itself to respond to him. He reaches out, not to destroy, but to sample, to taste the architecture of a system designed to govern heroes. The moment contact is made, the entire dungeon shudders, and something ancient, something aware, turns its attention fully toward him. Rimuru smiles, understanding now that his arrival hasn't just triggered a reaction. It has initiated a conflict that can't be contained to floors and monsters. The dungeon has acknowledged him as a variable that will redefine its future, and it is already preparing the next move as the stone beneath his feet continues to reshape itself around his presence. Rimuru steps deeper into the reshaping cavern, his movements deliberate, each footfall sending subtle vibrations through stone that seems almost alive. The dungeon isn't just reacting anymore, it's communicating. Corridors twist to channel him, openings and closures orchestrated like a symphony, every stone a note in a melody of trial. Monsters no longer charge blindly. They flank, probe, retreat, then regroup as if some unseen conductor is adjusting tactics mid-performance. Rimuru observes, processes, and adapts every pattern logged and analyzed by Great Sage. This is no longer a mere battle. It is a dialogue between him and the dungeon itself, an exchange of strategy and intent that transcends conventional combat. From somewhere deep below, a tremor radiates upward, not random, not chaotic, deliberate. The dungeon begins manifesting entities that defy standard classification. Creatures that combine attributes of multiple species, eyes in odd configurations, limbs forming and dissolving mid-motion. They strike not for blood, but for measurement. Their attacks calibrated to gauge Rimuru's adaptability. Even as they hit, they retract before any permanent harm is done. Rimuru allows himself to be grazed, letting his body, his magic, his very essence be tested. Every strike, every shift in the dungeon's configuration adds to the torrent of data he absorbs. He begins predicting movements before they happen, countering strikes before the dungeon has even decided them, and with each successful reaction a ripple spreads through the surrounding stone. Tiles fracture, walls pulse, and the air itself thickens with energy. The floor boss, the one he initially absorbed, begins to reform, not as a single entity, but as fragments embedded into the very structure of the dungeon. Its core divides, its essence seeding new monstrosities, new challenges designed to force Rimuru to think beyond instinct. The dungeon has escalated its game, constructing a multi-layered trial where no single path guarantees safety. Rimuru, however, navigates it effortlessly. Predator flows through him, swallowing attacks, consuming constructs, analyzing and absorbing skills without hesitation. He isn't merely surviving, he is teaching, subtly influencing how the dungeon adapts. It's a dance of power and intellect, and Rimuru leads without force, demonstrating the impossible, a being outside the rules of this world moving unchallenged within its most dangerous domain. As he moves, a pulse reverberates from the deepest core of the dungeon. It's not a monster, not a boss, but something far older, an intelligence embedded in stone and mana, something that existed before adventurers or gods cared to notice. The pulse carries intent, a recognition of his presence, and the dungeon itself begins to reorganize. forming conduits, chambers, and challenges that reflect not what he can defeat, but what he can comprehend. Rimuru studies it, noting that the dungeon is no longer just a labyrinth. It is evolving into a living mechanism capable of learning, adapting, and countering. And yet it has not yet learned enough. Every adjustment, every attack, every change of the terrain only serves to teach Rimuru more about the structure, about the rules of this world, and about the limits imposed by divine law. Rimuru reaches the edge of a vast chamber, stone walls stretching impossibly high, pulsating with an energy that feels like a heartbeat. The floor boss's essence has coalesced here, but it is incomplete, fractured, and unstable. He does not hesitate. With a thought, he extends Predator to consume the remaining fragments, assimilating skill, energy, and data simultaneously. The dungeon reacts violently. Floors quiver, walls fracture, and an unseen tremor shoots through the entire structure. Rimuru stands unshaken, eyes scanning, mind analyzing, and great sage processing. In that instant, the dungeon recognizes him not merely as an intruder, but as an anomaly, a force beyond its design. It reacts, evolves, adapts, and yet for the first time, Rimuru moves within it unchecked, rewriting the very rules it has spent centuries enforcing. The stones beneath him pulse in acknowledgement. The air hums with power, and deep below something ancient awakens fully, aware that Rimuru Tempest is no ordinary visitor, but a presence that will forever alter the dungeon's fate. The ground shifts once more, but this time Rimuru is ready. The dungeon is no longer a test to endure. It is a canvas, and he is the artist, moving freely through corridors that twist and pulse in response to his presence. Monsters, once coordinated and precise, falter under his perception, strategies undone before they can form. Every attack is a lesson, every movement a statement of dominance. And as he steps forward, deeper into the unknown heart of the dungeon, Rimuru understands the irreversible truth. This is no longer a place controlled by gods, by rules, or by mortal ambition. It is a living entity reshaped by him, evolving in real time to meet a being it cannot limit, cannot govern, and cannot predict. Rimuru Tempest has arrived in the DanMachi universe, and the dungeon will never be the same again. This is where the story truly begins. Above the dungeon, sunlight falls softly on the bustling streets of Orario, the kind of morning where adventurers' excitement and anxiety mingle in equal measure. Bell Cranel, young, eager, and filled with an unshakable desire to grow stronger, leads his small party toward a newly discovered floor. His heart races with the familiar mix of fear and thrill. Every dungeon descent carries a promise of danger and reward. But today, something feels different. There is a subtle vibration beneath his feet, a pulse in the air that doesn't belong to the floor's normal magic density. His instincts prick at him, the same instincts that have saved him more than once, but nothing could prepare him for what he is about to see. A figure moves with an unnatural calm in the depths below, a figure the dungeon itself seems unable to touch. Bell's breath catches in his throat. He has heard stories from veteran adventurers about anomalies, but nothing describes what he sees now. The figure, a blue slime with a presence that feels alive and intelligent beyond comprehension, maneuvers effortlessly through the chaos of monsters, consuming and analyzing them as if they were nothing more than lessons. Bell stumbles backward, his companions freezing as their eyes widen in disbelief. The first floor boss appears suddenly, summoned by the dungeon's frantic calculations, its grotesque limbs flailing in desperation. Bell's party instinctively draws weapons, ready to fight, but the slime doesn't hesitate. Rimuru moves, and the floor boss is gone before it even completes a swing. The energy released from the absorption ripples through the dungeon, shaking walls and sending shards of stone scattering like sparks. Bell's heart races not from fear, but from awe. He has never witnessed power like this, a force that defies the rules he has learned, the limitations imposed by Falna, or the careful calculations gods have placed on mortal strength. Bell's mind struggles to process the impossibility of what is happening. This is not an adventurer. This is not a hero sanctioned by gods. This is something entirely outside the system, rewriting the laws of engagement with every effortless movement. His companions glance at him, wide-eyed and trembling, but even they cannot tear their gaze away from the spectacle unfolding below. Rimuru's presence changes everything in the dungeon, and Bell feels it in a way he cannot explain. The monsters around the slime no longer attack with random aggression. They attempt strategies, flanking and feinting, but fail miserably. Rimuru seems to anticipate every motion before it occurs, countering with perfect precision. Bell watches as his comrades' attacks bounce off or are absorbed entirely. Their weapons and magic useless in the face of something that operates outside all known rules, and yet Rimuru does not harm indiscriminately. His movements are deliberate, his absorption measured, almost teaching as much as it is destroying. He disassembles the floor boss and surrounding monsters, then releases their energy into the cavern, stabilizing the chaos rather than letting it collapse entirely. Bell's chest tightens. He has faced death, stared into the abyss, and felt despair. But this is something entirely different. It is a force that makes even the bravest adventurer feel insignificant, a power that exists beyond ambition, effort, or divine blessing. As the dust settles, Bell notices the reactions of other adventurers nearby. Rumors spread like wildfire. Whispers of a blue demon who does not bear Falna, who operates outside the blessings of the gods, echo through the streets above. Bell himself is frozen, part fear, part fascination. He has trained, he has fought, he has grown, but he has never encountered someone whose strength renders all familiar metrics meaningless. Rimuru glides past the remaining monsters with ease, absorbing lingering threats and stabilizing the dungeon floor with effortless control. Bell's heart pounds with a strange mixture of dread and inspiration. For the first time, he feels the weight of true power, a force that dwarfs the limits he has struggled to overcome. He can see it clearly now. The world he has known, the rules he has trained under, the blessings he has relied upon. They are all irrelevant in the presence of this anomaly. Bell cannot look away as Rimuru surveys the floor, observing the chaos that remains and analyzing every pattern with an almost clinical detachment. The slime's form ripples, its translucent blue body reflecting the faint light filtering from the dungeon above, and Bell notices the intelligence in its movements. This is not instinct. This is strategy, understanding, and absolute control. Each absorption, each counter, each adjustment is a lesson in how the dungeon itself can be manipulated, dominated, and understood. Bell feels a burning curiosity, an unrelenting drive to understand, but he also senses the impossible gap between himself and this being. He knows instinctively that no matter how much he grows, no blessing, no Falna, no amount of training will allow him to reach this level of control overnight. Rimuru steps forward, and the remaining monsters recoil instinctively. The floor trembles slightly under his weight, and Bell's companions look on with wide eyes, whispering to each other in disbelief. The party leader, usually the center of their courage, cannot find words. Bell's voice catches an unspoken acknowledgement that what he is witnessing is more than a fight. It is a paradigm shift, a lesson without words, a demonstration of what true power can be when unbound by rules and divine oversight. Bell watches Rimuru finish surveying the floor, absorbing what is left of the chaos and stabilizing the dungeon with effortless precision. The slime's actions leave an indelible impression on everyone present. Not one of them can deny the extraordinary scale of what they have just witnessed. The blue figure does not speak. It does not boast. Its existence alone is a statement, a revelation of possibilities beyond mortal comprehension. Bell feels the first spark of something new, fear tempered with awe, and admiration that borders on obsession. For him, this is more than a fight. This is an awakening, a moment that will redefine his understanding of strength, courage, and the very meaning of growth. As the ripples of Rimuru's presence settle through the dungeon, the young adventurer cannot help but feel the unsettling truth that the world he knows, the rules he clings to, and even the blessings he worships may no longer matter when faced with a being that defies all limitations. Bell's legs feel heavy as he stumbles back slightly, his eyes locked on Rimuru, who moves with a fluid grace that seems almost casual but is meticulously precise. The monsters that had once threatened the young adventurer's party now lie dormant or absorbed entirely, leaving a vacuum in the dungeon's pulse, a silence that feels alive and expectant. Bell's mind races, trying to process what he's witnessing, but no previous training, no mentor, no God-given blessing could prepare him for this. It is as if time itself bends differently around the slime. Each movement Rimuru makes feels like a deliberate lesson, a choreography of overwhelming power tempered by understanding. Bell watches as a horde of smaller creatures, thinking themselves clever, attempt to coordinate a counterattack, only to be analyzed and neutralized before they can even close distance. There is no cruelty in the process, only efficiency, only understanding. Rimuru is a teacher in motion, showing what exists beyond the confines of Falna and divine oversight. Bell feels a mixture of excitement and dread tighten in his chest. The world he has trained to survive in, the metrics of courage and strength that he has measured himself against, are meaningless here, and yet he cannot look away. He sees the slime tilt slightly, observing the subtle changes in the floor, the patterns of mana around the remaining monsters, and the unconscious adjustments in the air currents. Rimuru's attention is everywhere and nowhere, simultaneously analyzing the dungeon as a system rather than a battlefield. Bell realizes with a shiver that he is witnessing not just a fight, but an entirely new paradigm of existence, one in which the rules he has always relied upon are rewritten in real time by a being who doesn't adhere to them at all. His hands twitch, aching to intervene, to test himself, but he knows instinctively that any move would be meaningless. Rimuru would see it, absorb it, and move on, leaving Bell and his companions untouched but painfully aware of the chasm between their power and this anomaly. The floor boss, reconstituted in fragments and scattered across the cavern, tries to retaliate once more, a desperate attempt to assert dominance. But Rimuru moves again, not with haste, not with brute force, but with methodical precision. The fragments are drawn together, dissolved and absorbed, each one stripped of the energy and knowledge it carried. The dungeon quakes in response, a deep, resonant vibration that travels upward to the surface and into the streets above Orario. Bell feels it through the soles of his feet, a tremor that carries the weight of something immense and unknowable. His eyes widen as he realizes the dungeon is reacting not just to Rimuru's presence, but to his understanding, his consumption, and his very existence. This is no ordinary battle. This is a systemic confrontation, and Rimuru is rewriting the battlefield itself. Bell's party exchanges glances, fear and awe mirrored in their expressions. They speak in hushed tones, words falling away as they attempt to articulate the impossible. Rumors will spread, tales will be told, but no story could capture the full scope of what they see now. Rimuru moves past the remnants of the floor boss, pausing briefly to observe the remaining monsters and the patterns the dungeon itself has begun to take on in response to his influence. The slime's eyes, glowing softly, reflect an intelligence and adaptability that is frightening in its clarity. Bell feels a sharp pang of inadequacy, realizing that all his efforts, all his victories, all the blessings he has sought and treasured, are but small flickers in the shadow of this overwhelming presence. Yet there is also fascination, a spark of inspiration that lights in his chest. He cannot help but watch, cannot help but learn, cannot help but feel that even if he cannot hope to match this power now, witnessing it will change him forever. And then as Rimuru absorbs the last vestiges of the corrupted floor's magic, stabilizing the chaotic energy that pulses through the dungeon, Bell notices a subtle shift in the ambient air. The dungeon is no longer just a stage for the battle. It is alive, attuned to Rimuru, reshaping itself, growing in response to his movements and decisions. Bell realizes that the slime's presence will have repercussions beyond this floor, beyond the monsters he has consumed. Something fundamental has changed, and the ripple of it will reach every corner of Orario. For the first time, Bell understands what it means to face an anomaly that exists entirely outside the structures that govern his world. The young adventurer swallows hard, heart pounding, as he watches Rimuru glide through the stabilized floor, a force entirely alien yet impossibly natural, a presence that will leave an indelible mark on both the dungeon and the world above. The residual energy of Rimuru's actions hangs in the air, a subtle hum that vibrates through every stone and corridor of the dungeon floor. Bell stands frozen, unable to tear his gaze away, as the young adventurer feels the sheer scope of what has just occurred. The floor, once chaotic and deadly, now breathes with an eerie calm. Monsters that once rampaged are either absorbed or neutralized, and the fragments of the floor boss have been reconstituted into harmless energy, a testament to Rimuru's precision and control. Bell can't comprehend the mechanics at play. He has fought fearsome creatures and faced the unpredictable fury of the dungeon countless times, but nothing has prepared him for an entity that operates outside the fundamental rules of his world. Rimuru isn't just strong, he is a system all his own, a force that exists independently of Falna, blessings, or even mortal comprehension. Bell's chest tightens with a mix of awe and anxiety. The young adventurer instinctively steps back, sensing the magnitude of Rimuru's presence. Each movement the slime makes, each subtle shift in form, each calculated absorption of lingering energy communicates something Bell can't fully process. It is strategy, intelligence, and raw power combined in a way that the Falna system cannot anticipate. The dungeon, now temporarily stabilized under Rimuru's influence, seems to pulse as if acknowledging a superior force. Bell realizes that what he is witnessing is not a battle that can be measured in victories or defeats. This is a paradigm shift, a demonstration that the very rules of engagement, the blessings that define adventurer growth, are not universal. They are merely constructs, and Rimuru exists beyond them. As Rimuru surveys the floor with a calm, analytical gaze, Bell notices the subtle ways the slime interacts with the environment. Stones are rearranged, magical residues are absorbed and redistributed, and the remaining dungeon energy flows in patterns that are no longer random but orchestrated. Bell understands, even in part, that Rimuru isn't fighting in the conventional sense. He is rewriting the environment, guiding the energy, and asserting control without aggression. The monsters that once posed a threat are neutralized not through brute force, but through meticulous understanding. An adaptation that turns the dungeon itself into a stage for demonstration. Bell's mind races, questions tumbling over each other. How can one exist outside the system that governs the entire dungeon? What does this mean for adventurers, for gods, for Orario itself? A sudden pulse shakes the floor again, sharper than before, and Bell realizes that the dungeon is not merely observing Rimuru, it is responding. Corridors shift subtly, walls pulse with a faint blue glow, and the air itself carries the echo of a presence that is calculating, adapting, and learning in real time. Rimuru steps forward, and the dungeon's reactions are instantaneous. Bell feels it, a resonance that bypasses the limitations of mortal perception. The monsters now move with a new kind of coordination, one that seems almost preemptive, striking in ways meant to test the slime rather than threaten it. But Rimuru is already ahead, absorbing and countering with such precision that even the dungeon itself seems to hesitate, unsure of how to proceed. Bell swallows hard, realizing that the floor's original purpose, to challenge and control adventurers, is no longer relevant. Rimuru has elevated the entire system into a dialogue, a test that cannot be controlled by the rules of Falna or divine decree. Bell's companions remain silent, their expressions a mixture of fear, disbelief, and awe. They whisper quietly to each other, unsure of whether to flee, fight, or simply watch. For Bell, however, the spectacle is more than intimidation. It is a revelation. He recognizes that true power is not measured in strength or skill alone, but in the ability to exist outside constraints. To understand and manipulate the system itself, Rimuru's presence challenges everything Bell has been taught, every lesson he has learned, and every aspiration he has held. The young adventurer feels a flicker of inspiration, tempered by an unshakable awareness of his current limitations. He can grow, he can train, he can strive, but the slime before him exists on a level that his world cannot accommodate yet. As Rimuru moves toward the next cluster of monsters, absorbing residual energy and stabilizing the dungeon floor, a ripple extends upward, unnoticed by mortal eyes. Bell feels it instinctively, a tremor that hints at awareness beyond the dungeon itself. This is not just a battle or a demonstration of power. This is a signal, a disruption, a ripple that will echo far beyond this floor. Bell's gaze lingers, and he realizes that Rimuru's actions will have consequences that reach into the upper echelons of divine observation. Gods, once confident in their dominion over mortals and dungeons alike, are unaware of the anomaly that now exists in Orario's depths. Rimuru has already begun to reshape the battlefield, to teach, to dominate, and to challenge the very system that defines this world. Bell's heart pounds as he processes the enormity of it all, and in that moment he understands that the world he knows is about to change in ways he cannot yet imagine. The air above the dungeon floor vibrates with an almost imperceptible hum, a resonance that Bell feels in his chest more than hears with his ears. Rimuru moves deliberately, flowing through the remaining monsters with the ease of a being who has already calculated every possible outcome. Bell watches as the slime absorbs not just the creatures themselves, but the residual energy that courses through the dungeon. The traces of divine magic left behind by previous adventurers, even fragments of the floor boss's essence that remain embedded in the stone. Every absorption feels purposeful, a demonstration of control, not destruction. The dungeon itself seems to acknowledge Rimuru, as if even the walls and floors recognize a superior force that cannot be opposed. Bell's awe deepens into something heavier, a sense of witnessing the impossible, a glimpse at a power that the gods themselves might struggle to understand or contain. Bell's companions remain frozen, their voices choked in disbelief, but their eyes mirror his own understanding. The blue figure is not an adventurer, not a hero, not even a creature defined by their world. It is something else, something that exists entirely outside the Falna system, outside the blessings that mark life and death in Orario. Rimuru moves with the precision of a predator, but the awareness of a scholar, absorbing skills, analyzing patterns, and adjusting the dungeon's environment without effort. Bell realizes with a jolt that what he sees is not a fight in the conventional sense. It is a complete redefinition of what it means to exert influence in this world. The monsters flounder because the rules they obey no longer apply. The dungeon trembles because its own mechanisms have never encountered a force beyond their design. And through it all, Rimuru remains calm, observing, understanding, and asserting control in ways that defy comprehension. A sudden pulse runs through the cavern, stronger and more deliberate than before. Bell feels it in the pit of his stomach, a wave of pressure that makes the hair on his arms stand on end. The dungeon is responding to Rimuru's existence, reacting in ways it was never meant to. Corridors twist slightly, Passages seal off and reopen, and faint blue light radiates from cracks in the stone walls. The creatures that survived the earlier chaos move differently now, coordinating attacks that are not random but calculated, almost experimental. Bell instinctively steps back, sensing that he is witnessing a system-wide trial in action. Rimuru anticipates every move before it happens, countering flawlessly, and the dungeon's attempts to challenge him only provide more information for the slime to absorb. Bell feels a surge of realization. This is a battle that cannot be measured by victory or defeat. It is a demonstration of existence outside limitations, a lesson in control and an exercise in dominance over a world that prides itself on rules and hierarchies. The magnitude of Rimuru's power presses down on Bell's mind. He has faced monsters that towered over him, fought alongside allies with divine blessings, and experienced the thrill of conquering danger with every ounce of courage he possessed. But this is something fundamentally different. Rimuru does not fight for reward, for recognition, or even for survival. The slime fights to understand, to analyze, and to dominate the parameters of existence itself. Bell watches, torn between fear and fascination, as the blue figure moves to the final cluster of creatures still lingering in the chamber. With a precise gesture, the monsters are absorbed, their energy redistributed, their patterns recorded and nullified. The dungeon itself seems to exhale, the tension that had gripped its walls and floors dissipating in response to Rimuru's actions. Bell feels the weight of this revelation pressing on him. The world he has known, the limitations he has trained under, and the blessings he has worshipped are all inconsequential in the face of a force that does not play by their rules. As the dust settles and the dungeon stabilizes, Bell notices the subtle changes in the air, the faint hum of energy that lingers like a heartbeat. The blue figure pauses, observing the chamber with an almost clinical detachment, yet there is an unmistakable awareness in its movements, a recognition of the environment as a living, adaptive entity. Bell's companions whisper among themselves, voices trembling, trying to make sense of what they have witnessed. But the young adventurer knows that no words can truly capture the magnitude of Rimuru's presence. He feels a mixture of fear, awe, and inspiration, realizing that the arrival of this being has changed the very rules of the dungeon floor, and perhaps even the city above. Rumors will spread, stories will be told, but the truth is far beyond mortal comprehension. Rimuru's actions are not just a battle, they are a statement, a revelation, and a force that will inevitably ripple through Orario and into the awareness of gods who have yet to notice the anomaly that now walks among mortals. Bell swallows hard, his chest tight with anticipation and unease. He knows instinctively that what he has witnessed today is only the beginning. The dungeon floor has been altered permanently. The monster's behavior has been rewritten, and the residual energy of Rimuru's presence will affect future adventurers in ways that cannot yet be measured. As he watches the slime glide toward the deeper, uncharted sections of the dungeon, absorbing, analyzing, and stabilizing, Bell realizes with stark clarity that the world he has known, his training, his aspirations, and the very blessings he relies upon will never be the same. Rimuru Tempest is not merely strong. He is a force outside the system, a being whose existence challenges the foundation of Orario itself. And the young adventurer cannot look away from the moment that will redefine everything he thought he understood about power, gods, and the dungeon. The tremor reaches Bell in a way that transcends fear. It is a pulse that speaks of something greater, something divine yet unclaimed. He senses that the anomaly he has just observed will not remain confined to this floor, nor to this city. The very gods who oversee blessings and fauna may soon take notice, their systems challenged by an unpredictable force that does not bend to their authority. Bell's heart pounds as he watches Rimuru step toward the shadows of deeper chambers, calm, confident, and utterly unbound. The realization settles over him like a weight he cannot lift. The balance of power in Orario has shifted, and the arrival of this one being marks the beginning of a new era, one that will test every adventurer, every god, and the dungeon itself in ways they are wholly unprepared for. Bell swallows, steadies himself, and follows, knowing instinctively that the story he has just witnessed is not yet complete. High above the bustling city of Orario, in the halls where gods sit entwined with mortal ambition, a ripple of unease spreads through the divine realm. It begins subtly, a tremor in the currents of mana that gods normally bend to their will without question. Hestia is the first to notice it, her usually lively eyes narrowing as she tilts her head, sensing something amiss deep within the dungeon. It is not a threat she can fight directly, nor a fluctuation she can ignore. Loki, ever vigilant and suspicious, frowns as her fingers trace the patterns of energy that pulse unnaturally through Orario's underground labyrinth. She feels it instinctively, a presence so unlike anything in the mortal world that it defies her understanding, a force operating entirely outside the rules that govern the blessings and fauna she oversees. In the beginning, the gods hesitate, unsure if this is an anomaly to observe, a monster to destroy, or a mortal ascendant whose power has gone unchecked. The reports trickle in from the surface. Bell Cranel's voice, trembling with awe and fear, reaches their ears indirectly through the network of adventurers and town gossip. Rumors of a blue demon capable of moving through the dungeon, absorbing monsters and rewriting the flow of energy around it, spread like wildfire. Hestia crosses the room instinctively, her mind racing with concern for the boy adventurer. But even she senses that the ripple is greater than any single mortal could create. Loki leans forward, analyzing the energy patterns now visible to the gods. The flow is erratic yet precise, chaotic yet controlled, a contradiction that cannot exist naturally within the rules of this universe. The blue figure in the dungeon is not merely strong, it is an unknown variable, a force beyond divine intervention, a being whose existence threatens to undermine the very systems they built to maintain order and influence over mortals. Ishtar is the first to voice what none of them yet want to acknowledge. Her voice rings with alarm and fascination simultaneously. It is not bound by fauna. It moves beyond divine blessing. Its presence is impossible. The room falls silent, every god present suddenly aware that their control is being questioned, that their laws governing life, death, and power may not apply here. Freya tilts her head, a mischievous smile forming. Though it does not reach her eyes, she senses opportunity in the chaos, a being that cannot be owned or influenced, yet her instincts warn that recklessness could lead to disaster. The murmurs grow louder. Gods who normally dictate the rise and fall of adventurers feel the creeping sensation of vulnerability. Orario, their carefully orchestrated city of heroes and blessings, is suddenly exposed to something outside their influence. Panic, subtle at first, begins to fester. Far below, Rimuru continues to navigate the dungeon, unaware of the stirrings above. Yet the energy he exudes resonates upward like a shockwave, invisible to mortal perception but impossible for gods to ignore. Each absorption, each stabilization, each calculated movement sends a signal to the divine realm. A being exists that does not answer to them, that is neither bound by fauna nor by the system they control. Hestia shifts nervously, sensing the implications. Loki's fingers tighten, her mind already formulating contingencies. Ishtar and Freya, goddesses who normally relish mortal chaos as playthings, feel something far more dangerous now, unpredictability that cannot be constrained or bargained with. The dungeon's pulse, amplified and altered by Rimuru's presence, acts as a conduit, carrying information upward, broadcasting the anomaly to every god linked to this world. The realization hits them simultaneously. The anomaly cannot be destroyed easily, cannot be controlled, and its power grows with each passing moment spent within their system. Bell, still standing at the edge of the stabilized floor, senses the tension without knowing why. He feels it instinctively as a tightening of the air, a subtle weight pressing down from above, as though the very heavens themselves are leaning in to watch the blue figure below. The young adventurer's instincts flare, telling him that the anomaly in the dungeon is no ordinary threat, that it is not a monster to defeat or a hero to ally with, but a force whose actions will ripple far beyond this floor. Rimuru moves with the same calm precision, absorbing and analyzing, oblivious to the divine eyes now tracking his every action. The gods themselves, accustomed to manipulating mortal destinies with ease, feel a rare, unbidden apprehension. What they are witnessing is not a mortal ascending through power, nor a monster simply growing stronger. This is a being operating outside their rules entirely, a presence that cannot be sanctioned, blessed, or limited. Whispers pass between the gods. Questions arise, arguments flare. Hestia argues for caution, for observation. Fearing interference could provoke disaster. Loki insists on containment, devising strategies to trap or influence the anomaly before it spreads its effect further. Ishtar and Freya debate the potential benefits, their competitive natures conflicting with the looming realization of risk. The divine council is in turmoil, a rare breakdown of unity and confidence. Each god senses a thread of uncertainty, an unsettling truth that power alone does not guarantee control. Rimuru's very existence has forced the gods to reckon with a reality they did not anticipate. Their creations, their blessings, and the rules that govern this world may not apply to everyone. Orario, the city built on divine oversight and mortal aspiration, is suddenly vulnerable to an unknown variable that grows stronger with every second. The dungeon floor itself, far below the observation of the gods, continues to shift subtly in response to Rimuru's presence. Corridors realign, monsters adapt and evolve, energy flows are absorbed and redistributed, and the blue figure moves with calculated intent. The gods, observing, cannot intervene directly without violating the natural balance or risking catastrophic backlash. Panic escalates into a rare, shared clarity. This anomaly cannot be ignored, cannot be underestimated, and must be addressed. Yet no strategy seems sufficient, no blessing strong enough, and no mortal tool adequate to confront something beyond comprehension. The very laws they created, the systems they enforce, are challenged. Rimuru's presence is a reminder that power alone does not equal control, that influence can be circumvented, and that a being exists in Orario who defies the divine hierarchy itself. The unease among the gods deepens as the ripple from Rimuru's action spreads further through Orario. Hestia paces in her hall, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by tension as she tries to sense the nature of the disturbance. Loki stands silently, her sharp eyes scanning the currents of energy that now move unpredictably through the city and the dungeon below. Every pulse from the depths carries information, energy, and intent. Gods accustomed to absolute control now feel uncertainty, a foreign sensation that gnaws at their confidence. Ishtar leans forward, her fingers tracing faint arcs of magic in the air, trying to understand a force that refuses to be measured. Freya smirks, but it's forced, her gaze sharp, calculating the potential chaos Rimuru could bring, not just to the mortal world, but to the games she herself has enjoyed for centuries. They all sense it. This is no ordinary anomaly. This is a presence that exists outside their system entirely, a force they cannot influence through blessing, charm, or divine power. Meanwhile, below, Rimuru continues to glide through the dungeon with effortless control. The corridors pulse with his influence, monsters move and react, but none can challenge him. The slime absorbs lingering energy and patterns from the dungeon, restructuring the flow of magic and life to suit his understanding. Every action sends feedback upward, and the gods feel it. The energy pulses through Orario like a beacon, vibrating in ways that make even the most ancient deities flinch. Hestia senses it first, a kind of intelligence that dwarfs mortal thought, a presence that cannot be tamed by blessings or Falna. Loki's mind races, plotting containment strategies even as she recognizes their futility. Freya leans back, eyes narrowing in fascination and frustration. She senses opportunity but also danger, knowing instinctively that Rimuru is a being no god can fully control. The tension in the divine halls becomes palpable, a shared acknowledgement that Orario has changed. Bell, still observing from the edge of the dungeon floor, feels a shift in the air as well. The young adventurer senses that the currents above, invisible to mortal eyes, are reacting to Rimuru's presence. It's a pressure, a hum, a pulse that communicates far more than words ever could. He feels the weight of divine attention, the unspoken awareness that gods are watching, uncertain and cautious. Bell's heart races. He has faced overwhelming odds before, but nothing compares to the magnitude of what he perceives now. The blue figure gliding across the floor of the dungeon is not just powerful, it is rewriting the rules themselves. And above, in the halls of the gods, panic begins to grow. Not the panic of fear alone, but of realization. Something exists in Orario that cannot be dictated, controlled, or measured by divine authority. In response, the gods begin to act. Hestia suggests caution, proposing that they observe the anomaly closely before intervening, worried that any premature action could provoke disaster. Loki, true to her nature, argues for containment, considering intricate strategies to manipulate or trap Rimuru before he spreads further influence. Ishtar and Freya debate potential acquisition, intrigued by the opportunity to claim or study a being that defies the limitations of the world. Even in their deliberations, however, an undercurrent of tension laces every word, a recognition that this anomaly is unlike anything they have ever encountered. Every instinct tells them that Rimuru's presence is not temporary, that it is not a random event, and that it cannot be ignored without consequences. The dungeon pulses beneath Rimuru, responding to his control, adapting to his presence in ways that the gods cannot predict or manage. Bell watches as walls subtly shift, corridors reconfigure, and monsters adapt to Rimuru's movements with efficiency and precision. Even as he witnesses this, he can feel the unseen weight pressing down from above. The gods themselves are tense, alert, and unprepared. Their systems, their blessings, their manipulations of mortal destiny, none of it applies to Rimuru. The anomaly is outside their domain, and the realization that a single being could operate beyond divine authority shakes them more profoundly than any battlefield or rebellion ever could. Hestia grips the edge of a table, her eyes wide, realizing that this is no ordinary situation. Loki leans back, her face unreadable, but her mind calculating probabilities and contingencies, aware that conventional intervention may fail. Ishtar's excitement is laced with tension, the thrill of chaos tempered by awareness of risk. Freya's amusement is only partial. Beneath it lies recognition that this anomaly could rewrite the rules of their playground, destabilizing systems that have operated for centuries. They all know it. Rimuru is not simply strong. Rimuru is an existence that defies the framework of Orario itself, a variable outside the authority of gods and mortals alike, and the implications of this realization send a shiver through the halls of divinity. Bell feels the weight of this moment. He senses the impossible scale of what is occurring below and above, and despite the distance and his inexperience, he understands that he is witnessing the early tremors of a crisis that will reshape Orario. Rimuru, unaware of the divine gaze, continues to move through the dungeon with precision, analyzing, absorbing, and asserting control. Each step reverberating through stone and air. The gods, unsettled, remain caught between fear, fascination, and the undeniable truth that their system is being challenged in a way they cannot yet counter. Bell swallows hard, the implications sinking in. The anomaly in the dungeon is no longer just a localized threat. It is a catalyst that will force gods, adventurers, and the dungeon itself to confront a reality beyond their control. The tension in the divine halls thickens as the gods fully grasp the scope of Rimuru's presence. Hestia's usually cheerful demeanor is gone, replaced with a tight-lipped worry as she senses that the anomaly below is not constrained by mortal rules or divine blessings. Loki remains composed, calculating probabilities, running through countless scenarios in her mind, each ending with some degree of failure or instability. Even her seasoned mind, sharpened over countless centuries of manipulating mortals, struggles to predict the blue figure's next moves. Ishtar and Freya, goddesses who often see mortals as playthings, exchange wary glances. For the first time, opportunity and danger sit side by side, impossible to separate. Something has entered Orario that cannot be toyed with, cannot be contained, and cannot be predicted. The anomaly challenges the very systems they have built to control the world. Blessings, Thalna, dungeon rules, and divine oversight alike. Below, Rimuru continues to move effortlessly through the dungeon. Every step, every absorption, every calculated adjustment is a pulse of information reaching upward into the divine realm. Monsters that once presented threats are now mere data points, their attacks anticipated and neutralized with a precision that seems almost impossible. Bell watches, awe and fear colliding inside him as the blue figure reshapes the dungeon in real time. Walls subtly shift, corridors realign, and residual energy is absorbed and redistributed with deliberate intent. Rimuru is not fighting for victory, reward, or recognition. He is teaching the dungeon itself, demonstrating control over a system designed to test, limit, and manipulate mortals. The floor trembles under the weight of this invisible lesson, and Bell realizes with growing dread that the anomaly is changing the very fabric of the dungeon, and, by extension, the world above. The gods sense it as well. The tremors of Rimuru's influence are unmistakable, radiating far beyond the confines of the dungeon floor. Hestia's heart races as she feels the ripple, an almost conscious awareness that something is operating outside their laws. Loki frowns, noting that standard containment spells and manipulations are ineffective at even predicting the anomaly's path. The dungeon itself pulses in resonance with Rimuru, like an instrument attuned to an entirely new melody. The realization hits them simultaneously. They are not observing a threat in the traditional sense. They are observing an entity that exists independently of their authority, a being whose very existence invalidates the structures they've relied upon for millennia. Even the most experienced gods, accustomed to absolute control, feel a rare, unfamiliar panic stirring. Bell, still on the floor, senses the pressure above. It is subtle, intangible, but undeniable. A weight that presses on him without touching him, a sense that forces beyond mortal comprehension are reacting to the anomaly below. The young adventurer has faced overwhelming odds before, but nothing like this. The blue figure moves without hesitation, and Bell's mind struggles to reconcile the calm precision with the magnitude of its power. Monsters flinch instinctively. Even the environment itself shifts subtly in response to the slime's presence. Bell realizes that Rimuru is not just strong. He is a systemic force, rewriting the flow of energy, life, and magic in the dungeon without effort, operating entirely outside the rules of this world. He feels a mix of awe, fear, and inspiration, a realization that nothing he has learned or achieved could prepare him for the scale of this presence. The gods begin to act more urgently. Hestia urges caution, warning against intervention that could escalate the situation uncontrollably. Loki, ever the strategist, begins devising intricate plans for containment, mapping possible scenarios that account for the anomaly's unpredictable nature. Ishtar and Freya debate over potential acquisition or observation, recognizing both the danger and the opportunity. Every decision, however, is underscored by a shared understanding. Rimuru cannot be ignored. The anomaly cannot be coerced, controlled, or destroyed easily. The blue figure in the dungeon represents a fundamental challenge to divine authority, a presence that exposes gaps in the systems of blessing, falna, and dungeon management. Panic simmers beneath every careful plan, a rare vulnerability among gods who are otherwise accustomed to omnipotence. Rimuru continues to glide through the dungeon, absorbing residual energy, neutralizing remaining threats, and subtly manipulating the environment. The blue glow of his form casts shifting shadows across the floor, reflecting the intelligence behind every movement. Bell watches, trembling slightly, understanding more with each passing moment that this is not a fight in any conventional sense. This is a demonstration of control and dominance over a system that has long dictated the limits of mortals and monsters alike. The dungeon quivers in response to Rimuru's actions, as if aware of his intelligence and intent. Each pulse of energy that travels upward carries information to the divine realm, signaling that something has entered Orario that operates beyond their oversight. Hestia's hands tremble slightly as she feels the pulse. Loki's mind races, trying to map the anomaly's influence and predict the next move. Ishtar and Freya exchange wary, calculating glances, recognizing that Rimuru's presence is both dangerous and irresistible. The gods, for the first time in millennia, feel a sense of uncertainty, the kind that comes when an entity cannot be measured, controlled, or even fully comprehended. Bell swallows hard, sensing the gravity of the situation. He realizes instinctively that what he is witnessing is not just a moment in the dungeon. It is a seismic event that will ripple through Orario, forcing gods, adventurers, and monsters alike to respond to a reality that has been fundamentally altered. The divine halls of Orario are tense in a way they rarely experience. Hestia paces, her usually cheerful energy replaced with a focused anxiety, sensing the anomaly's influence growing stronger by the moment. Loki sits back, calculating probabilities, each scenario more alarming than the last. The anomaly below, the blue figure moving through the dungeon, does not just defy mortal understanding. It defies divine law itself. Even their most potent blessings and manipulations of falna would be insufficient to contain it. The gods feel it like a pulse, vibrating through the very foundations of Orario, touching everything from the adventurers in the streets to the monsters lurking in the shadows. A presence exists outside their authority, a force that cannot be coerced, bargained with, or limited, and with each passing second it grows stronger, more influential, more undeniable. Below, Rimuru continues to glide effortlessly through the dungeon. The corridors pulse subtly as he moves, energy patterns shifting and rearranging according to his calculations. Monsters flinch, falter, and are absorbed with precision. The dungeon itself seems to bend to his understanding, walls subtly realigning, floors adjusting to accommodate his movements. Bell watches, eyes wide, realizing that Rimuru does not simply fight. He manipulates the environment, neutralizes threats, and rewrites the rules in real time. Every absorption, every adjustment, every measured motion sends energy rippling upward. And the gods feel it. The anomaly is not passive, it is active, interacting with the dungeon as if it were a living entity and transmitting its influence directly to the divine realm. The tension is tangible, almost suffocating. Hestia, for the first time, feels uncertainty. The anomaly cannot be predicted, cannot be influenced, and cannot be measured using any divine metric she knows. Loki leans forward, fingers steepled, eyes narrowed, calculating containment strategies even as she realizes their likely futility. Ishtar and Freya, goddesses used to manipulating mortals for their own games, recognize the blue figure as an opportunity and a threat in equal measure. They understand instinctively that Rimuru's presence changes the balance of Orario, the rules of the dungeon, and even the hierarchy among adventurers. The anomaly is teaching them something they have never had to consider: the existence of a power that does not answer to gods, blessings, or mortal systems. The panic is not loud, it is a quiet, creeping realization, a weight settling across the divine council that they are witnessing something beyond control. Bell feels it too, though he does not understand the magnitude. The subtle pressure, the unshakable tension in the air, the almost conscious weight pressing down from above, all signal that something extraordinary is happening beyond his perception. He watches Rimuru glide past a cluster of monsters, absorbing residual energy, neutralizing attacks before they begin, and subtly reshaping the environment. Every movement demonstrates intelligence, strategy, and power that dwarf anything Bell has ever encountered. The young adventurer feels awe, fear, and inspiration colliding inside him. He knows instinctively that the anomaly before him is more than strong. It is a systemic force, a being whose existence challenges the foundation of the world he has trained to navigate. The gods continue to deliberate, their panic growing as the anomaly's influence spreads. Hestia argues for observation, cautioning against intervention that might provoke the blue figure into unmeasured actions. Loki insists on containment, outlining strategies that, in theory, might limit the anomaly, but even she knows they could fail. Ishtar and Freya, ever calculating, debate potential engagement, recognizing both opportunity and danger. The tension among the divine council is palpable, each god feeling the unsettling reality that their control over Orario, the dungeon, and mortal fate is slipping. Rimuru's influence below the dungeon floor grows, his presence a constant reminder that even gods can be rendered uncertain when confronted with an existence beyond their authority. The dungeon itself seems to respond to the attention above. Corridors pulse, walls subtly shift, and monsters adapt, behaving as if aware not only of Rimuru, but of the divine gaze observing him. Bell watches as the blue figure moves, analyzing patterns, absorbing energy, and stabilizing the chaotic floor. It is clear to him that Rimuru is not merely reacting to the dungeon or the monsters. He is shaping the entire system around him, exerting influence that the gods themselves cannot fully perceive or counteract. Every step sends a ripple upward, and Bell realizes that the divine panic is justified. The anomaly below has already rewritten the rules of engagement, and its effects will cascade far beyond this floor. As Rimuru glides past the last cluster of surviving monsters, absorbing their energy and stabilizing the dungeon's flow, the gods can no longer ignore the implications. The anomaly is a presence entirely unbound by their laws, a force capable of manipulating systems they created to maintain order. The panic grows, subtle yet undeniable, as each god contemplates the possibility that this being could spread its influence to the city above, challenge their authority, and render centuries of control meaningless. Bell feels it instinctively, a tightening in his chest, the weight of a reality shifting in ways he cannot yet fully comprehend. Rimuru's presence is no longer just a phenomenon in the dungeon. It is a signal to the world, a catalyst for change that will force gods, adventurers, and monsters alike to confront an entirely new hierarchy of power. Above, Hestia's hands tremble as she senses the anomaly's influence inching closer to the surface. Loki's calculations begin to fail under the unpredictable complexity of Rimuru's presence. Ishtar and Freya exchange tense, unreadable glances, both recognizing the potential to capitalize on this power but fearing the consequences of miscalculation. The divine council is fractured, uncertainty replacing the confidence that has ruled Orario for centuries. Rimuru, oblivious to their concern, continues his methodical traversal, absorbing, analyzing, and rewriting the dungeon's systems in real time. Every pulse, every subtle movement, every adjustment is a reminder that a being exists beyond the constraints of gods, mortal rules, and divine blessings. The realization settles like a storm. Orario, the dungeon, and even the gods themselves have never faced anything like Rimuru Tempest. The blue figure is a force outside all authority, and the ripple of his existence is only beginning. The city of Orario is restless. Streets that were usually filled with the measured rhythm of adventurers and merchants are now alive with whispers, rumors, and hurried steps. A blue presence, strange and inexplicable, has emerged from the depths of the dungeon, and its effects are already rippling through the city. Adventurers pause mid-stride, weapons in hand, senses alert, feeling the subtle, almost tangible pressure of something extraordinary nearby. Word spreads faster than any official notice could keep up with. The smallest encounters in the alleyways become conversations of awe and fear. Bell Cranel, still reeling from his observations deep in the dungeon, races back to the surface, heart pounding, eyes wide, every instinct screaming that the world above has changed as fundamentally as the floor below. Above him, families prepare for the day's usual conflicts and competitions, unaware that their carefully maintained balance is about to collapse entirely. Rimuru emerges from the dungeon, a solitary figure glowing faintly blue under the early morning sun. The city seems to hold its breath as the slime steps onto the surface. Every adventurer, from the lowest novice to the highest-ranking veteran, instinctively feels the shift. Monsters and wild magic that had lingered near the surface hesitate, confused, sensing a presence they cannot challenge. Families across Orario sense the anomaly in different ways. Those who rely on brute strength find their attacks ineffective in anticipation of the blue figure's dominance. Those who rely on cunning feel their strategies collapsing as Rimuru's intelligence assesses them instantly. For the first time in Orario's long history of organized competition and territorial battles, the playing field is not merely leveled. It is obliterated. Bell feels a mixture of fear, awe, and inspiration as he witnesses the anomaly step into the open, its calm, deliberate movements radiating control that no mortal or divine blessing could hope to counter. The first signs of disruption begin in the streets near the guild. Low-ranking adventurers attempting to patrol or claim territory suddenly find themselves immobilized, not through force, but by the overwhelming sense of inevitability Rimuru projects. The slime moves, and the city seems to bend subtly to accommodate his presence. Halls once bustling with negotiation and the delicate tension of familiar rivalries fall silent as the sheer authority of this presence radiates outward. High-ranking adventurers and captains of various familias emerge, attempting to respond to what they assume is a conventional threat. Their strategies, tested over countless battles and political maneuvers, crumble instantly under the analytical precision of Rimuru. Monsters summoned to contest territory falter, absorbed or neutralized without effort. The Familia leaders exchange tense glances, some recognizing instinctively that they face not a mortal, not a hero, not even a god in the conventional sense, but a force beyond the rules they have spent their lives mastering. By midday, the Familia War that had simmered for months reached its apex. Conflicts that were meant to last weeks or months collapse in a single disorienting instant. The streets are filled with stunned adventurers, their weapons drawn and spells ready, yet ineffective. Rimuru moves calmly, absorbing the residual energy of skirmishes before they can escalate, neutralizing threats without killing indiscriminately. Bell watches as the blue figure analyzes every familia's formation, predicting movements before they occur, dismantling strategies almost mechanically, yet with a precision that feels deliberate. The city's hierarchy, painstakingly built over years, begins to unravel. Families that once relied on intimidation, numbers, or divine blessings suddenly find their influence meaningless in the face of Rimuru's presence. Leaders of rival factions realize too late that the playing field has not merely shifted, it has vanished entirely. The gods, still observing from their divine halls, grow increasingly frantic. Hestia's concern for the safety of mortals clashes with the realization that direct interference could provoke a force they cannot control. Loki's attempts at predictive strategies falter as Rimuru's movements defy every expectation, every simulation, every law of probability she considers. Ishtar and Freya, who had debated engaging or manipulating the anomaly, now sit tensely, recognizing that their influence over mortal chaos has been rendered ineffective. The ripples from Rimuru's presence in the dungeon, combined with his emergence into Orario, are forcing even divine beings to reassess their assumptions. The city's familiar rhythm, the careful dance of Famílias vying for dominance, adventurers seeking glory, and gods subtly manipulating events, has been shattered in a single night by a presence entirely outside their authority. Bell witnesses the surreal collapse firsthand. He sees rival captains frozen mid-command, their strategies and orders rendered meaningless. He sees adventurers hesitating, unable to act despite the urgency of their roles. Rimuru's presence is not threatening in the conventional sense. There is no aggression, no malice, no loud display of destructive power. Yet every movement carries authority, intelligence, and inevitability. The slime walks the streets as if patrolling, yet every step neutralizes potential conflict, disperses tension, and establishes dominance over the chaotic energies that fueled the Familia War. Bell feels the magnitude of what is occurring. Rimuru has not fought the war in a conventional sense. He has ended it simply by existing and exerting influence, demonstrating a level of control so complete that no mortal or divine force can contest it directly. The chaos spreads outward. Minor skirmishes in back alleys and marketplaces vanish before they ignite. Mercenaries, guild enforcers, and street adventurers attempt to intervene, only to find their movements anticipated and countered without effort. Energy pulses subtly through the city, drawn into Rimuru's control, and the blue glow that surrounds the slime becomes a symbol of unchallenged authority. Bell watches as the city itself seems to recognize Rimuru's dominance. Even the architecture, the streets, corridors, and plazas feels subtly altered, accommodating the presence of a being that does not simply occupy space, but asserts control over it. Families that had plotted complex schemes for territory and influence find their plans irrelevant. In one night, the fragile balance that held Orario together begins to collapse entirely, replaced by the quiet, undeniable assertion of Rimuru's presence. The sun casts long shadows across the streets of Orario, yet even its light feels secondary to the quiet authority radiating from Rimuru. Adventurers who once moved with confidence now hesitate, the weight of the anomaly pressing on their instincts like an invisible hand. Bell moves through the streets alongside Rimuru, his mind struggling to keep pace with what he is witnessing. Skirmishes that had promised glory and reputation are already dissolved into irrelevance. The high-ranking adventurers and captains of every familia pause mid-command, realizing that strategies honed over years, carefully timed maneuvers, and even the blessings of the gods themselves are no match for a presence that exists outside conventional rules. Every block, every plaza, every alley that once served as a battleground now hums with subtle energy that Rimuru controls, a soft but undeniable restructuring of the city's chaotic order. Leaders of rival Famílias emerge, their expressions a mixture of defiance and dread. They had built their influence on power, reputation, and divine blessing. But none of it matters now. Rimuru does not raise a hand or launch an attack. The slime's mere presence is enough to assert control. Commands shouted across streets, spells woven in frantic gestures, and coordinated maneuvers all falter against the anomaly's calm dominance. The city itself seems to respond to Rimuru, corridors subtly realigning, the flow of magical energy redirected, and monsters that had wandered into the streets neutralized or absorbed instantly. Even the most seasoned adventurers feel helpless, their carefully rehearsed tactics meaningless against a being who understands and manipulates the system itself with effortless precision. Bell realizes, with a mixture of fear and awe, that Rimuru's victory is not through violence, but through the sheer inevitability of his existence. Meanwhile, the gods observe, frantic and divided. Hestia's worry for mortal lives clashes with her fear of provoking the anomaly, knowing that direct interference could spiral into disaster. Loki paces, calculating probabilities and contingencies that crumble under Rimuru's unpredictability. Ishtar and Freya watched tensely, their competitive instincts piqued by the opportunity but tempered by recognition that Rimuru is a force they cannot influence. The divine council is fractured, panicked, and uncertain as the blue presence continues to assert dominance without a single overt attack. Their blessings, which had always controlled the fate of adventurers and moderated conflicts, falter in the face of an entity whose existence itself bypasses their authority. As Rimuru moves deeper into the heart of the city, minor skirmishes and territorial disputes dissolve even before they escalate. Mercenaries attempting to enforce Familia claims freeze mid-action. Spells that were meant to intimidate or attack fail to manifest as the energy of the anomaly subtly neutralizes chaotic currents. Bell observes as the streets themselves seem to bend around Rimuru, almost guiding movements, stabilizing conflict and dispersing tension with subtle pulses of absorbed energy. The slime's presence alone is enough to end disputes that would normally require prolonged battles, political maneuvering, or intervention from the gods themselves. Within a single night, the very structure of Orario's social and political landscape begins to collapse under the inevitability of Rimuru's authority. In the plazas, groups of adventurers who had been poised to clash now find themselves hesitating, energy shifting in ways they cannot anticipate. The blue glow that surrounds Rimuru casts a calm, soft light, yet its effect is undeniable. Control. Bell notices the subtle ways the slime's awareness interacts with the environment, analyzing and adapting in real time. Each movement, no matter how minor, signals understanding, foresight, and dominance. The city itself seems to acknowledge this, streets flowing, magical energy reorganizing, and threats neutralized not violently, but systematically. Rimuru does not even speak, yet every adventurer feels the weight of his intelligence and authority. The organized chaos that fueled months of Familia conflicts collapses completely, replaced by an unspoken rule. This anomaly will decide the terms. The leaders of every Familia realized the gravity of the situation far too late. They had assumed their status, numbers, and divine blessings could protect them or at least buy time. But the anomaly operates on a level beyond their comprehension. Spells designed to assert dominance fail, intimidation falls flat, and even coordinated strikes cannot gain traction. Rimuru's presence is not an attack, it is a recalibration of the system itself. Bell watches as captains and leaders exchange panicked glances, each recognizing the futility of resistance. What they had built over months, perhaps years of plotting, training, and strategic maneuvering collapses in an instant. Within hours, the Familia War that had threatened to destabilize the city was rendered irrelevant, ending not through conquest or bloodshed, but through the undeniable presence and calculated influence of a being operating entirely outside the rules. The city of Orario is now in a state of stunned silence. Streets that once echoed with the clash of steel, the chanting of spells, and the shouts of adventurers are eerily quiet. Even the most aggressive mercenaries and battle-hardened captains hesitate, sensing a presence that cannot be ignored or challenged. Rimuru glides calmly through the heart of the city, every motion deliberate, every observation precise. The blue glow that surrounds the slime bathes the streets in an ethereal light, casting shifting shadows that seem almost alive. Bell follows closely, awestruck, as he witnesses what no mortal, or even God, has likely seen before. A being capable of imposing control without confrontation, of ending conflict without violence, simply by existing and exerting influence over the flow of energy around it. High-ranking adventurers from multiple familias attempt to regroup, calling out orders, coordinating strategies, and trying to rally their forces. Yet their efforts falter instantly. Rimuru's awareness seems to anticipate every maneuver, every attempt at resistance. Residual magical energy, the very force that once empowered spells and attacks, is absorbed, redistributed, or neutralized with an elegance that feels almost surgical. Even those who rely on cunning, tricks, and deception find themselves rendered ineffective. The system they have learned to exploit, the rules of the dungeon, the balance of power among familias, and the blessings that give them advantage, has been rewritten by a presence that does not abide by any of those rules. Bell feels the enormity of the moment pressing on him. The blue figure moving through the streets is not just ending a war, it is redefining the entire framework that allowed conflict to exist in Orario. The gods continue to watch, panic and disbelief mingling with fascination. Hestia's worry for mortal lives is tempered by fear. She knows that interfering could provoke a response from an entity that surpasses all mortal and divine understanding. Loki, normally unshakable, sits tensely, running calculations that fail to predict the anomaly's influence. Ishtar and Freya exchange glances filled with both excitement and caution. Opportunity exists, but so does the real threat of failure. Every god senses it. The anomaly is not merely powerful. It exists outside the established hierarchy. The Familia War, which had been a carefully controlled competition, now collapses in a single night under Rimuru's silent dominion. No blessings, no status, no accumulated power can counteract a presence that operates beyond the constraints of both mortal and divine law. Bell observes the effects firsthand as the last pockets of resistance crumble. Captains shout orders, adventurers charge or retreat, and yet none of it gains traction. Rimuru's movements are deliberate, subtle, and efficient. Streets and alleys are stabilized, magical energy flows harmonized, and residual threats dissolved without overt violence. Even the architecture, the narrow corridors, open plazas, and elevated walkways, seems to adjust subtly to Rimuru's presence, accommodating a being who does not simply occupy space, but asserts authority over it. Bell's mind races. He has witnessed battles that tested his courage, dungeons that challenged his limits, and monsters that threatened his life. But nothing compares to the quiet, inexorable dominance of a being who does not need to fight in order to win. The Familia War that had gripped Orario for months was already over, resolved in one night by the unspoken authority of Rimuru Tempest. The ripple effect extends beyond individual conflicts. Merchants, observers, and even casual onlookers feel the weight of Rimuru's presence. Fear, awe, and respect spread through the city almost instinctively, and word of the anomaly travels faster than any formal message could. Families, leaders, and adventurers alike begin to acknowledge a new order, not one established through violence or politics, but through a force entirely outside their comprehension. The blue glow of Rimuru moving through the city becomes a symbol of inevitability, a signal that the established balance of power has shifted irrevocably. Bell feels a shiver run through him, understanding that the war's end is only the beginning of a larger transformation, one that will redefine every interaction, alliance, and rivalry in Orario. Even the monsters in the streets sense the shift. Those who had once wandered freely, exploiting gaps between Famílias, now hesitate, intimidated by the control Rimuru exerts over energy itself. Spells that once ignited chaos fizzle before manifestation. Patterns of attack, defense, and ambush are nullified as the anomaly interacts with every moving element in the city. Bell watches as Rimuru pauses at a central plaza, absorbing residual magical energy from every conflict and realigning it in a way that is imperceptible to most, but unmistakably deliberate. Every adventurer, regardless of rank, feels the weight of this action. What had taken months of planning, months of skirmishes, and months of maneuvering is undone in hours. Resolved by intelligence, presence, and calculated influence rather than the conventional tools of combat. The gods, still observing from above, feel the tremors of power in ways that make them uneasy. Hestia's worry mixes with relief that no unnecessary bloodshed has occurred. yet she senses the destabilization that will ripple through mortal society. Loki's calculations falter further, as Rimuru's influence refuses to conform to any predictable model. Ishtar and Freya, while intrigued, recognize that mortal and divine power alike are insufficient to oppose a being whose existence transcends both. For the first time, the gods are not guides, observers, or manipulators. They are witnesses. Bell stands in the midst of it, heart pounding, and understands that Orario has shifted irreversibly. The city's social order, the balance of the Familias, and the very foundation of dungeon-based power have been rewritten in a single night. Rimuru has not fought a war. He has ended it calmly and efficiently by asserting a presence that leaves no room for resistance, no space for defiance, and no doubt of dominance. The streets of Orario have fallen into an eerie calm. Where chaos, shouts, and the clash of steel once reigned, there is now a quiet order imposed not by law or force, but by presence. Rimuru moves through the city with a deliberate grace, absorbing residual energy from skirmishes, neutralizing magical turbulence, and subtly reshaping the environment. Bell follows, witnessing a phenomenon that defies comprehension. The Famílias that had vied for dominance are immobilized not by fear of death, but by the inexorable logic of Rimuru's control. Captains, leaders, and seasoned adventurers alike are frozen mid-command, realizing instinctively that no strategy, no spell, and no divine blessing can challenge what exists beyond the rules. The Familia War that had threatened to fracture Orario is over, ended not through bloodshed or destruction, but through authority beyond contest. As Rimuru reaches the central plaza, the city itself seems to acknowledge his dominion. Streets subtly shift, alleys adjust, and energy flows harmonize under his influence. The monsters that had slipped into the streets hesitate, sensing a force they cannot oppose. Even magical constructs, traps, and lingering curses falter, neutralized without direct confrontation. Bell observes the calm precision of each action, the absence of chaos despite the magnitude of authority being exerted. Rimuru's presence is a statement, a declaration that Orario's old rules, its fragile balance of power, and its long-standing rivalries are irrelevant in the face of something beyond mortal comprehension. The city breathes under this new order, every corner resonating with the quiet but undeniable command of the slime. Families that had plotted, schemed, and clashed for months found their influence evaporating. Leaders attempt to rally forces, shouting orders and gesturing commands, only to find their efforts neutralized before they can manifest. The blue glow around Rimuru acts as a symbol of inevitable authority, and even the most arrogant captains feel the weight of submission. Bell watches as the slime pauses, lifting its gaze to the city around it, absorbing the energies of conflict, and redistributing them to stabilize what had been fraying at the edges. The streets, marketplaces, and corridors are now under a subtle but absolute order imposed by a presence beyond comprehension. Adventurers who had trained for years, honed their skills, and relied on divine blessings realize the futility of resistance. High above, the gods react in a flurry of panic, fascination, and disbelief. Hestia feels tension in every pulse of mortal energy, her protective instincts clashing with fear of provoking Rimuru. Loki's calculations fail repeatedly, as the anomaly defies every model, probability, and simulation she attempts. Ishtar and Freya, normally gleeful manipulators of mortal chaos, find their influence meaningless, recognizing a force that supersedes mortal ambition, divine blessing, and the intricate politics of Orario alike. The divine council is fractured, divided, and deeply unsettled, as the anomaly continues to assert dominance without direct aggression. The presence of Rimuru Tempest has made even the gods cautious, aware that one misstep could trigger consequences beyond their control. Bell walks amidst the adventurers and captains, noting the stunned expressions and hesitant movements around him. The Famílias, previously locked in cycles of ambition and conflict, are immobilized not by threat, but by inevitability. Rimuru's calculated presence, his absorption and redistribution of energy, and his subtle manipulation of the environment render any attempt at resistance meaningless. Even the most powerful adventurers, whose names strike fear into countless foes, pause, their confidence shattered by a force that does not attack, yet dominates entirely. In one night, Rimuru has ended what months of conflict could not, reshaping the social and political landscape of Orario with an elegance and efficiency that no mortal or divine force could hope to match. The city, now quiet under the glow of the anomaly, seems to acknowledge a new hierarchy. Streets flow with order, energy pulses stabilize, and potential threats vanish before they arise. Bell realizes the full magnitude of what he has witnessed. The Familia War is concluded, not by battle, not by conquest, but by the intelligent assertion of a being whose existence itself imposes authority. Even the gods, who had long guided and manipulated the destinies of mortals, are reduced to witnesses, uncertain how to respond. Rimuru's calm, deliberate presence is enough to maintain control, absorb potential chaos, and neutralize threats, demonstrating that raw strength alone is not what defines dominance. Understanding, adaptation, and absolute presence are. As the night falls over Orario, the city is transformed. Families once locked in rivalry now hesitate to act. Adventurers no longer challenge each other, and even minor skirmishes in back alleys dissipate before they ignite. Bell stands in the center of the plaza, heart pounding, witnessing an event that will be remembered for generations. Rimuru's influence is subtle, yet absolute. Every corner of the city resonates with his presence, and even those who cannot perceive the anomaly directly feel the shift. The Familia War, which had consumed months of effort and ambition, was over in a single night, resolved not through brute force, but through an intelligence and authority beyond mortal or divine comprehension. Orario has entered a new order, one dictated by the quiet but unassailable presence of Rimuru Tempest. Orario, having been subdued and reorganized by Rimuru's quiet but absolute presence, seems calm on the surface, yet deep below the city, the dungeon itself begins to stir in ways no one, not even the gods, could have anticipated. The floors that Rimuru had stabilized, corridors he had reordered, and monsters he had absorbed are no longer simply passive obstacles. The dungeon, a living adaptive system designed to test mortals and challenge adventurers, begins to respond with a kind of intelligence that rivals Rimuru's own. Residual energy, previously neutralized or absorbed, begins to fluctuate, forming complex feedback loops that pulse with awareness. The very walls of the dungeon shift subtly, corridors twisting in unpredictable patterns, ceilings rising and falling, and the air thickening with magical energy that hums like a heartbeat. Bell, observing from the surface, senses a change in the dungeon's rhythm, a subtle but undeniable pulse that signals the emergence of a force operating against Rimuru's previously unchallenged dominance. Rimuru, ever analytical, notices the first signs almost immediately. The slime pauses mid-step as energy readings spike unexpectedly. Monsters that had been absorbed or neutralized seem to reappear in altered forms, their abilities amplified and their intelligence sharpened. Some exhibit a cunning that defies Rimuru's previous calculations, adjusting strategies mid-engagement, coordinating with environmental hazards, and responding to energy manipulations as if they are now sentient extensions of the dungeon itself. The blue glow around Rimuru flickers slightly as he recalibrates, absorbing residual fluctuations and countering adaptive defenses, yet even he feels the dungeon pushing back, testing the limits of his perception, control, and adaptability. This is no longer a simple environment to traverse or master. It has become an opponent, evolving in real time to challenge the anomaly that has rewritten its rules. The energy flowing through the dungeon is different now, no longer predictable or passive. Walls begin to emit pulses of magic, Floors subtly shift underfoot, and the air itself seems to resist movement, thickening in areas where Rimuru tries to stabilize corridors. Monsters appear in layers, coordinated attacks combining brute force with adaptive intelligence that seems almost premeditated. Rimuru's calm, methodical movements are tested as never before. He analyzes, absorbs, and adapts, yet the dungeon's evolution forces him to calculate not only monster behavior, but the very structure and flow of energy in real time. Bell watches from a safe vantage, heart racing, realizing that what had once seemed like Rimuru's perfect control over the dungeon is being challenged by the system itself. The city above may have been subdued, but the dungeon is now asserting its will. High above, the gods observe with mounting anxiety. Hestia's worry turns to fascination as she senses the dungeon's emergent behavior. Loki furrows her brow, realizing that the anomaly and the dungeon together create a dynamic neither divine power nor mortal skill can fully anticipate. Ishtar and Freya, who had watched the chaos unfold on the surface, now turn their attention downward, sensing the shifting currents of magical energy and monster behavior. The dungeon is no longer a static test of adventurer skill. It is an evolving intelligence, reacting, adapting, and countering in ways that echo Rimuru's own methods. Even the most powerful deities feel unease. The system they helped create, designed to challenge and contain mortals, is now evolving in response to a being that has rewritten its own rules. Within the dungeon, Rimuru's analytical abilities are pushed to their limits. He notes patterns, adapts strategies, and reabsorbs energy. Yet the complexity and speed of adaptation are unlike anything he has encountered before. Monsters coordinate in ways that appear intentional, traps reset and reposition themselves unpredictably, and the very walls of the corridors seem to anticipate movement. Rimuru's signature calm is tested as he calculates contingencies not just for combat, but for the evolving dungeon itself. Each step must account for structural changes, energy fluctuations, and emergent intelligence that moves as if the dungeon has become a sentient opponent. Bell follows as closely as possible, awestruck, understanding that the anomaly which ended the Familia War is now being challenged in an arena far more complex and dangerous than the surface city. The dungeon's evolution manifests as both subtle adjustments and sudden disorienting changes. A corridor previously stable collapses, forcing Rimuru to rapidly adapt, while residual monster energy reorganizes into hybrid forms that combine traits from multiple species. Some creatures develop new abilities on the fly, countering strategies Rimuru has used repeatedly. The slime moves with precision, yet each engagement now carries an element of unpredictability, forcing Rimuru to think several steps ahead simultaneously. Bell's heart pounds as he realizes that Rimuru's calm efficiency, the same presence that ended the Familia War in one night, is now being tested in a crucible designed to adapt, learn, and fight back. Even the very air in the dungeon seems to resist Rimuru's movements. Mana pulses unpredictably, creating zones where energy flows counteract the slime's stabilizing influence. Floors rise and fall as if the architecture itself is responding to Rimuru's presence, while ceiling formations shift to block or funnel movement. The dungeon is no longer merely a passive environment. It is an active participant, evolving to challenge, counter, and test Rimuru's capabilities in ways that even the gods cannot fully predict. Bell watches from a distance, awe and tension gripping him, as the anomaly that once ruled Orario effortlessly is forced to navigate an opponent unlike any it has faced before, the dungeon itself. Rimuru presses onward, but every step now requires far more calculation than before. The dungeon responds with uncanny precision, corridors twisting into mazes that shift mid-movement, forcing him to adapt in real time. Floors ripple under his weight, magical energy surges unpredictably, and traps that had been inert for centuries spring to life with enhanced complexity. Monsters no longer act independently. They coordinate attacks, flank, and use the terrain intelligently, combining brute force with adaptive strategies that Rimuru has never encountered. Each engagement demands a new approach, a rapid analysis of energy patterns and instantaneous decision-making. Bell watches from a hidden vantage point, pulse racing, realizing that the entity which ended the Familia War without a single strike is now facing a force that can match, even anticipate, his every move. Hybrid creatures emerge from previously stable zones of the dungeon. Their forms grotesque yet terrifyingly efficient. Limbs, eyes, and magical abilities mutate mid-combat, merging traits from multiple species to counter Rimuru's previous tactics. One creature combines the speed of a spider with the elemental energy of a flame monster, anticipating attacks and creating openings to draw Rimuru into traps. Another adapts its regenerative capabilities in real time, forcing Rimuru to recalculate absorption sequences or risk being overwhelmed. The dungeon is no longer a static arena. It is a dynamic, reactive ecosystem, learning from Rimuru's patterns and evolving at speeds that test even his extraordinary adaptability. Bell shivers at the thought that the system itself has become an opponent, one capable of thinking, adjusting, and striking with precision. Energy surges across the dungeon floor, pulsing unpredictably as Rimuru moves. Walls emit intermittent magical feedback that interferes with his perception, floors tilt to redirect momentum, and even ceilings collapse selectively to create hazards mid-movement. The slime's usual serene efficiency is tested as it absorbs, adapts, and recalibrates continuously. Every solution Rimuru implements is countered by a new variation of environmental threat or adaptive monster behavior, forcing him to anticipate not just attacks, but the evolution of threats themselves. Bell watches intently, noting the complexity of the situation, and realizes that this battle is no longer a test of strength. It is a war of strategy, foresight, and intelligence against a system that has become self-aware. Above, the gods are frantic. Hestia senses the shifting tides of energy and feels a tremor of fear. The dungeon, which they have long considered a tool to challenge mortals, is now challenging Rimuru, and by extension, the established order of Orario. Loki's calculations spiral into chaos as every model fails to account for the adaptive intelligence manifesting in the dungeon. Ishtar and Freya, who had observed the chaos on the surface with intrigue, now lean forward in concern. This is no ordinary anomaly, and the dungeon itself, a creation meant to test mortals and challenge adventurers, is proving to be Rimuru's first opponent capable of forcing uncertainty. The gods recognize that the creature they had viewed as a controlled variable in mortal affairs now faces a force that is entirely self-directing, adaptive, and relentless. The dungeon escalates its resistance further. Environmental hazards appear spontaneously. Collapsing pillars, sudden pools of elemental energy, and shifting floors that create complex mazes in moments. Monsters adapt, learning from each of Rimuru's absorption sequences, developing counter-strategies mid-engagement. Even the previously neutralized sections of the dungeon pulse with residual energy, manifesting new challenges that seem specifically tailored to test Rimuru's intelligence and adaptability. Every corridor, every room, every floor becomes a living puzzle, forcing Rimuru to anticipate not only the present, but the potential evolution of threats in the moments ahead. Bell can barely keep up mentally, the scale and speed of adaptation overwhelming in its complexity. Rimuru, ever calm, begins to analyze the system-level patterns emerging from the dungeon's evolution. He identifies adaptive cores in the energy flows, feedback loops in monster behavior, and triggers within environmental hazards. Yet each solution he applies is met with a new mutation in strategy or structure, forcing continuous recalibration. Even the hybrid monsters now act with foresight, manipulating the terrain, coordinating with other creatures, and using energy pulses to create zones of disadvantage. Bell's awe grows. He sees clearly that Rimuru is engaging with a system-level intelligence that rivals his own. A force that is learning, adapting and evolving faster than any mortal or god could manage. The dungeon is no longer simply a battlefield, it is an opponent, dynamic and self-aware, shaping every encounter to test Rimuru's limits. The dungeon's evolution accelerates, its responses growing faster and more unpredictable with every passing moment. Corridors twist in impossible geometries, forcing Rimuru to calculate routes that shift while he moves, the very architecture itself acting as a weapon. Floors tilt at sudden angles, channeling momentum toward strategically placed traps, while ceilings lower or collapse selectively to block paths or create hazards mid-attack. Magical energy pulses unpredictably, forming zones that nullify absorption techniques or redirect elemental attacks. Monsters, no longer independent entities, now behave like extensions of the dungeon's will. Hybrid creatures act with coordination and foresight, using both brute force and cunning strategy to exploit even the smallest miscalculation. Rimuru adjusts, absorbs, and recalibrates, yet every countermeasure he implements is tested by the dungeon's constant adaptation, pushing his analytical capabilities to their absolute limit. Bell follows cautiously, keeping his distance, heart pounding as he watches Rimuru face a challenge unlike anything in Orario's history. He sees the slime's calm exterior, the subtle glow that still radiates intelligence and authority. Yet Bell knows this is not an ordinary battle. The dungeon itself, a system designed to challenge and contain adventurers, has become a sentient adversary. Its adaptive intelligence is not random. It observes, analyzes, and counteracts reshaping energy flows and monster behavior in real time to oppose Rimuru's influence. Every step Rimuru takes, every energy pulse he manipulates, and every absorption he executes is met with an evolved response. Bell feels the weight of the moment pressing on him. This is not just a test of strength or skill, but a confrontation between an intelligence beyond mortal comprehension and a system that has learned to resist it. Hybrid monsters grow more terrifying with each encounter. One combines the regenerative ability of a high-tier creature with the speed and agility of multiple smaller species, attacking in patterns designed to trap Rimuru in corridors while simultaneously manipulating energy flows. Another forms from residual magical fluctuations, a construct of pure elemental chaos, capable of anticipating Rimuru's adaptive techniques and altering its behavior mid-assault. Even creatures previously considered mundane now display adaptive intelligence, repositioning themselves to block movement, forming coordinated ambushes, and exploiting environmental hazards. Rimuru, calm and calculating, analyzes each threat instantly, adjusting absorption sequences and energy manipulations, yet the pace of evolution forces constant vigilance. Bell marvels at the complexity, understanding that the dungeon is no longer a passive environment. It is a dynamic battlefield, evolving continuously to test the anomaly in ways that no mortal or god has ever witnessed. Above, the gods are gripped with unease and growing panic. Hestia watches with tension, her concern for mortal lives mixing with awe at the complexity unfolding below. Loki's normally precise calculations are failing to keep pace with the dungeon's adaptive strategies, and even she begins to realize that this is a challenge beyond conventional prediction. Ishtar and Freya, who had observed the surface conflicts with a mix of intrigue and amusement, now recognize the gravity of what they face. The dungeon's evolution is a force beyond their authority, a self-directing opponent capable of countering Rimuru's influence with a level of intelligence and adaptability that exceeds mortal or divine norms. Panic and fascination intertwine in the divine halls as they witness the anomaly being tested in a crucible of living intelligence, a system capable of pushing even Rimuru to his limits. The blue glow surrounding Rimuru flickers subtly as he adapts to the evolving threats. Each corridor presents new hazards, each floor shift requires instant recalibration, and each hybrid monster challenges a previously mastered absorption sequence. The dungeon seems to anticipate Rimuru's strategies, creating layers of complexity designed to force him into continuous adaptation. Bell watches with wide eyes as Rimuru analyzes energy flows, anticipates monster movements, and manipulates environmental shifts with precision. Yet the dungeon continues to counter, forcing him to think not in terms of individual threats, but in terms of system-level patterns. This is intelligence against intelligence, adaptability against adaptability, a battle that transcends physical confrontation and enters the realm of pure strategy and foresight. Energy pulses unpredictably, forming zones that challenge Rimuru's movement and absorption capabilities. Monster attacks are coordinated with environmental hazards, forcing split-second decisions. Hybrid creatures adapt mid-combat, learning from each interaction and altering behavior accordingly. Even areas of the dungeon previously thought stabilized are now dynamic, shifting subtly to test his limits. Rimuru moves with calculated grace, yet Bell can feel the tension in every pulse, every shift, every attack. The anomaly that ended the Familia War with effortless authority now faces a living system that matches its intelligence and challenges its control, pushing it to limits that no mortal or god has ever witnessed. The dungeon's adaptive responses begin to escalate further. New hybrid monsters emerge with abilities combining multiple species. Elemental zones shift unpredictably, and previously passive energy flows become reactive, countering Rimuru's manipulations and forcing constant recalibration. Walls twist to redirect movement, ceilings lower selectively to create ambushes, and floors tilt to manipulate momentum. Rimuru's calm and calculated presence is tested to the extreme as he absorbs energy, adapts strategies, and anticipates the system's evolution in real time. Bell watches, heart racing, understanding that Rimuru's dominance is no longer guaranteed. The dungeon has become an intelligent adversary, capable of learning, adapting, and resisting a being previously thought unstoppable. The dungeon reaches a new level of sophistication, as if awakening with a consciousness of its own. Floors, walls, and ceilings move in concert, corridors folding and unfolding to create the traps that are simultaneously physical, magical, and strategic. Energy flows pulse unpredictably, forming barriers that resist absorption while redirecting attacks into newly emergent hazards. Hybrid monsters now operate as coordinated units, each reacting to Rimuru's every move, using predictive tactics that suggest the dungeon is learning at a systemic level. It is no longer a mere battlefield, but a sentient entity, challenging Rimuru not through raw force alone, but by continuously evolving, adapting, and countering his every calculation. Bell, watching from a vantage point safely above the fray, can hardly believe what he is witnessing. The anomaly that had ended the Familia War with effortless authority is now being tested by the dungeon itself. An opponent that mirrors intelligence, adapts instantaneously, and reshapes the very environment in real time. Rimuru glides through the ever-shifting corridors, maintaining calm while his mind works at incomprehensible speed. He recalibrates absorption sequences, analyzes environmental shifts, and anticipates monster adaptations with near-perfect precision. Yet the dungeon forces him to think not just in terms of combat, but in terms of systemic strategy. Hybrid creatures combine speed, elemental power, and intelligence in ways that constantly test his adaptability. Energy pulses that once fed him now resist, redirecting attacks into hazardous zones. The dungeon has become a self-aware system, responding dynamically to Rimuru's influence, forcing him to constantly evolve his approach. Every action he takes is met with a counteraction, every absorption a new challenge, and every corridor a puzzle designed to test his analytical and strategic limits. Bell observes, heart racing, as Rimuru maneuvers through this ever-evolving labyrinth. The dungeon's intelligence appears almost playful, restructuring itself to create situations that are both dangerous and unpredictable. Hybrid monsters flank from multiple angles, traps reset instantly after being neutralized, and magical energy surges unpredictably, requiring instant recalibration. Even the environmental hazards seem to act with intent, channeling momentum, energy, and pressure to challenge Rimuru's movement and strategy. Bell realizes that this is not simply a battle of power. It is a war of intellect, foresight, and adaptability, with Rimuru facing the ultimate test of his abilities against an opponent that is effectively alive. High above, the gods watch with a mixture of fear and fascination. Hestia's concern for mortal lives intensifies as she realizes that the dungeon's evolution could threaten more than just adventurers. It could challenge the very fabric of Orario itself. Loki, normally unshakable, is forced to admit that the anomaly and the dungeon together form a dynamic that defies prediction. Ishtar and Freya lean forward tensely, intrigued by the chaos, but aware that this is a force neither mortal ambition nor divine intervention can easily control. The dungeon's evolution has created an intelligent opponent capable of testing Rimuru to his absolute limits, and even the gods can only observe, powerless to intervene without risking consequences that could spiral beyond comprehension. Rimuru, aware of the dungeon's adaptive intelligence, shifts strategies subtly. He begins to anticipate systemic patterns rather than individual threats, predicting the dungeon's movements as a network of energy, architecture, and monsters. Hybrid creatures attempt to exploit weaknesses, energy flows resist manipulation, and corridors fold unpredictably. But Rimuru counters with precision, absorbing, neutralizing, and redirecting energy in a constant flow of adaptation. Bell watches, struck by awe, as Rimuru demonstrates that dominance is not simply about raw power, but about understanding, analyzing, and responding to complexity with calm and efficiency. Even as the dungeon evolves in real time, Rimuru remains the central axis of control, matching intelligence with intelligence, foresight with foresight, and adaptation with adaptation. As the battle escalates, the dungeon pushes further, almost as if it recognizes the anomaly's presence as a challenge to its own existence. Hybrid monsters mutate mid-combat, corridors shift to create impossible mazes, and magical energy pulses with chaotic intent. Rimuru responds in kind, reading the flows of energy, predicting adaptations, and neutralizing threats faster than they can materialize. Bell, standing at the edge of the fray, senses the tension, the stakes, and the magnitude of what is unfolding. This is a confrontation not of strength alone, but of comprehension, adaptability, and intelligence at a scale beyond mortal or divine understanding. Finally, after relentless adaptation and counter-adaptation, the dungeon stabilizes, its evolutionary onslaught temporarily paused. Rimuru floats at the center of a newly formed chamber, absorbing residual energy, analyzing remaining patterns, and recalibrating environmental shifts. The blue glow radiates calm authority, signaling that, for the moment, the anomaly has matched and contained the dungeon's evolution. Bell exhales, realizing the scope of what has occurred. Rimuru not only conquered the surface conflicts and ended the Familia War in one night, but now has faced the dungeon itself as a self-aware adversary and emerged with control intact. The balance of power in Orario has been rewritten entirely, with Rimuru standing at the apex, a being beyond mortal comprehension and divine influence. Above, the gods exchange silent, tense glances. Even with their power, they acknowledge the anomaly's control over both city and dungeon. Hestia, Loki, Ishtar, and Freya each feel the limits of their influence, understanding that Rimuru Tempest is now a force that cannot be controlled, predicted, or easily opposed. Bell looks on, awe and inspiration filling him as he witnesses a turning point in Orario's history, a single being reshaping the city, neutralizing its conflicts, and mastering the living dungeon that has defined adventurer life for generations. Orario is no longer the same. The Familia Wars, the monsters, the challenges, and even divine oversight are all subject to the presence of Rimuru. The dungeon settles into a temporary equilibrium. Hybrid monsters subdued, energy flows stabilized, and corridors restored to functional order. Yet every adventurer and god senses the lingering pulse of a system that has learned, adapted, and evolved. Rimuru's presence remains the central node, his influence unmatched. Yet the experience signals that challenges of intelligence, strategy, and adaptability may still arise. Bell's respect, awe, and determination grow, knowing he has witnessed something monumental, a being who does not merely fight but understands, manipulates, and transcends the very systems that govern both mortal and divine worlds. This concludes our journey for today. Orario has witnessed a shift unlike any in its history. The Familia War ended in one night, the city reshaped, and the dungeon itself tested and evolved against an unparalleled force. Rimuru Tempest's arrival has rewritten the rules, leaving mortals, monsters, and gods alike to reconsider their place in a world now defined by a presence that transcends all authority.